There's no other way to start this, I think, than Eater asking you the question very directly. What is next for your channel? You're, I mean, right now kind of finishing up the main sequence that you've been working on for a long time. And once the thing is a Turing complete computer, what's the next video?
Well, step one is to get the thing to be a Turing complete computer. I've been working, obviously not full time, for several years, making this series of videos on this little 8-bit computer, and have had a lull, a little dry spell here where I've just had a lot of other things going on in my life. Been super busy.
You basically stopped loving your audience, is what I'm hearing.
That's what they tell me. Yeah, that's. I feel terrible, but
Do you feel, by the way, like since when people are like, I want more, I want the next one, in a way that's meant to be encouraging, do you ever feel just this rush of cortisol in response to that of like, God, like I'd give you more if I could?
yeah, totally.
It's more counterproductive than the commenters think it is.
Yeah. It's always fun because there are times when I'm like actually working on a new video and I'm about to put one out, and then I get one of those comments just like, "Hey, I'd love the next video," and I was like, "Boy, are you in luck! I'm going to make your day," and that makes me feel better. But most of the time, when people comment like, "I want another video," I'm sadly not working on another video, and it just makes me feel bad.
Even though like the intent is very positive and it should be heartwarming, and the rational side of the brain acknowledges that, but the
Yes.
emotional side, it's like, like get off my back.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I mean, what's next is actually, I do need to finish the computer. It is not a Turing complete computer. And I think it's like 2 or 3 videos away from doing that. And I just need to find a little bit of time to do that and get that wrapped up. After that, I really don't know. There's a few different options. I'm actually interested in your thoughts on what would be interesting.
Well, so one thing you threw out there before was like talking about printed circuit boards and talking people through how to use the relevant software there.
Yep.
Personally, I think that would be really cool. Breadboards feel a little bit like the Legos of electrical engineering. I mean that in a positive sense, but you have the feeling that this is far and removed from what real computers do. At least I do. And then the closer it is to actually looking like pictures of integrated circuits that you see, and it approaches that in the limit, that's awesome. That's satisfying.
Yeah, see, that's interesting because I think there's an aspect of what I've been doing that is appealing because it's so accessible. Breadboards are just so easy. You just get them and you push things into the little holes, and then you can make this thing that is a computer. And that to me almost makes it more accessible than using CAD software and going through this whole process that, there's enough levels of indirection in that just, it doesn't make it quite as visceral or real, or it seems harder because then you have to start soldering things. And that's like,
I mean, part of this might be the challenge on your part, but I feel like you, the Bob Ross of computer engineering, would be the one to make it look more feasible and make it look more approachable. And the contrast between how unapproachable it seems without knowing that much and how approachable it is once Bob Ross tells you how to do it. That's where I see the pleasing satisfaction for the audience.
yeah, totally. And it may sound like I'm pushing back. I totally want to do this. It's just a question of when and what's most important to do. And like, how, what direction do I go? I mean, I to some degree, I've spent, like I said, a couple of years, obviously very much part-time, working on this sort of one computer project. I kind of want to do something very different.
Yeah. Like what?
I don't know.
Like what's the most out there thing? Teach people how to fly?
Yeah.
Go in the direction of chemistry? Vlog? Like get out of this education business? Beauty channel?
Yeah.
I could see a beauty channel.
Eater, you've aged great.
What's that?
You've aged very well. There must be a secret there.
That's legitimately true. If I didn't know your actual age, I would have pinned you maybe late 20s instead of like 67 or whatever you are.
40.
And I'm obviously just messing around. But no, in truth, I think a lot of people out there want to know what's your secret.
I don't have one.
That's kind of a secret in itself.
Closely guarded, I see.
Do you think it's lack of worry about aging that's driven you to look young?
No, because I worry about it. I think as much as anyone else.
So gently chiding as if you were 67 wasn't the smartest social move.
So I have a question for you, Eater. What is the objective function that you're trying to maximize, or the set of objective functions you might be trying to maximize? Is it happiness of your audience? Is it something you'd be interested in doing? Is it something that's just fun? Is it number of viewers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I've actually thought a lot about this lately about, what is it that drives me and what am I trying to do with various projects? And the thing I keep coming back to, and I'm interested in what both of you think about this, is I think something that drives me is teaching things in kind of the way that I wish I had been taught. Doing that and, getting feedback that I'm doing that and that it's effective and people enjoy it is probably I think that is like the thing that is at the essence of everything I like to do.
So find the largest residual value between how good you think you can explain something and how poorly someone explains something to you, and cover that topic.
Yeah, that might be an approach.
That kind of side skirts Stenhaug's question, though, because it still begs the question, why is that the thing that you're optimizing, right? Is it for self-satisfaction because you get this sense of closure over something that you didn't learn properly the first time, but later on learned, and this is the cap to put on that? Is it a utilitarian thought that this is likely the most efficient increase you can make in the world's educational content?
I don't know.
Yeah, that honestly, like, I think that's the most honest answer. Because I was asked this, basically the same question Stenhaug's putting out, like, what's the goal of these, right? I was getting feedback on the first neural nets video, and he, very piercingly was like, okay, what is the objective of this video? And at first I gave an answer, because anytime you're asked that, you come up with some answer to give. But in thinking about it, the most honest take is simply, I have no clue what my goal is here. I have vague senses of what I like more and what I like less, but there does not exist the articulation of this is the function for the world or the function for myself that I am maximizing.
Yeah, likewise. And the only way that I can sort of think about that question is to just sort of go back to my experience, which is I wasn't a particularly good student. I was a C student throughout school, got a lot of sort of feedback from the system, if you will, that I wasn't quote unquote smart or learning or whatever. Yet I enjoyed tinkering with things. I enjoyed learning things on my own. And so there was always this disconnect between, I'm interested in things, but the system, I'm not interested in school, and school just wasn't doing me any favors. I just sort of felt like the system was letting me down or failing me in some way. I think as I've gotten sort of more experience and done more things in the world, I've realized, no, actually I can learn. It was the system. There was that uncertainty, is like, well, maybe it is me. But I think I've gotten enough feedback in my life that no, it's the system. It wasn't me. I'm perfectly capable of learning things and contributing productively to society and all the rest.
Well, see, this right here, like, this is one of the big values of, I think, you as a person, and especially you as a person with an audience sitting in front of you. There are very few people out there who simultaneously didn't do great in school or felt like it was failing them, but nevertheless came out with an appropriate sense of confidence about what they themselves could achieve. Those don't usually go hand in hand. And I feel like it's this recipe to actually be a source of inspiration for the many students out there that are feeling similar things, but don't have the corresponding confidence, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something that drives me, is kind of the empathy for, it's very easy for me to look back and see how things could have gone very differently. I wasn't a great student. I got into like a in-state school and then proceeded to fail out twice at college. I think in total, I took calculus 4 times and failed it 4 times. So not a lot of great positive feedback there. But I feel like I got very lucky because this was in the mid 90s, at the sort of peak of the dot-com boom. And so, knowing anything about computers almost guaranteed you a job, and people weren't asking a lot of questions. And so I was able to kind of get my foot in the door in terms of industry. And then, once you start getting experience in industry, and that started clicking for me. But like, how often does that happen to someone at the peak of an industry that they are well suited for? So it's just very easy for me to kind of look back and see, I was just very lucky in that situation. And it's easy for me to imagine someone who'd be in the exact same situation and not have that insight or not get lucky in the ways that I did. And maybe that's what drives me, is to sort of try to help that person who is really just me.
Given that, maybe we should reframe the original question. What's next for Ben Eater, the channel, that addresses those people most directly? Just the story that you're telling right now, I think the fact that that story is told is in and of itself a meaningful thing and can be a source of inspiration. Showing people who enjoy tinkering how to build their own computer like this obviously addresses that in a much deeper way. But if that was the central thing in mind, saying, okay, there are others who are like you, who might not be in a similar place in history and industry, but need some direction, right? What is the set of videos that is most helpful to them?
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. And because I think that is, in some sense, like, that's the part of the videos that I've made that I find kind of the most inspiring is seeing people who have kind of taken the videos and then extended them and actually built the computer themselves and then posted pictures or sent me pictures or posted videos, of their own thing. And in some cases, they've taken the design and understood it and continued to build on it or, do more complex things, add more memory, whatever it is.
Well, let me ask you this. How many of those are students versus adults?
It's not 100% either. I guess I don't know the exact breakdown, but I've definitely seen younger sort of high school age kids doing it. Definitely also seen a lot of adults doing it. So less clear what the sort of life impact of that is. I think there's a...
But there exist high school students.
Yeah, for sure. And there's adults who are doing it with their kids, which I think is kind of cool. But I think what is interesting to me is that when I see the pictures and videos and things that people send me of their own projects, what immediately comes to my mind is I know exactly what this person knows. Like they built this thing. They have gone through these steps. It's almost in my mind sort of a credential that tells me something, very meaningful about that person, that they have certain interests, that they have certain abilities, almost in kind of the way that I couldn't demonstrate when I was in school. Like the system didn't give me a tool to demonstrate my abilities in this dimension.
Can we print some kind of Ben Eater certificate of accomplishment that when these people mail you something, you have some automated system that mails them this certificate?
I'm not sure how accredited that would be or anything.
Not at the start, but you fast forward 20 years and just you see.
Yeah, think big. I think the real value, though, is walking into a job interview with those things.
Yeah.
I mean, that always impresses me. I mean, I hire, software engineers, but the software engineer who comes in and has a whole list of projects that they've built in their spare time and they've tackled all sorts of interesting technologies like that. That's how you set yourself apart.
Interview candidate comes in, he's like, yeah, I've been following this really cool channel. I decided to kind of build my own computer. It's just this side project. You're hired.
Well, I mean, it's not, maybe for me, that would maybe, no.
I hear what you're saying, though. I feel similarly. I think personal projects are dramatically more valuable than things like grades in the eyes of a lot of employers. Not all of them. There's still plenty of antiquated systems out there. And a lot of my intuitions are skewed more by Silicon Valley than maybe they should be. But I just 100% agree with that sentiment.
Either would you ever start something that is in person? It strikes me as your story has... There's two things that are strong, which is your mindset around learning and around education. And I think it goes beyond the growth mindset, but that's maybe the popular term to use. And then also your approach of how you should learn something. And it seems like if you had a room full of people, I don't know, building a computer with you and you were circulating and they're in groups, it seems perhaps people would pay for that experience. Perhaps you would find great meaning in that experience. Did you ever do something offline like that?
Yeah, potentially. I hadn't thought about it. The one thing I had thought about is, kits or something like that to just sort of make it easier for people to get started. I mean, frankly, never expected that people would actually attempt to build this, although I don't know why, because I certainly would have if I'd seen a video series like this. But it's challenging to source all the parts. I used parts that I had, some of which I probably bought 20 years ago, and so they're not always available. And I probably could have thought through that a little bit better to make it easier for people to find all the parts or buy it as a single kit. And something like that.
All right, so we got a little bit of a running list here. I want to end this podcast with a concrete answer to your question, by the way. I want there to be the thing that we know will happen for Ben Eater at some point. No pressure on the timeline there. But videos on printed circuits is one thing that you had kind of mentioned to me one day. And then kits would be awesome because that starts to go just outside of YouTube itself and really addresses some of your core beliefs about activity, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, and the thing is that there are a lot of people doing kits and doing things like that. So it's not clear to me that I could do that better.
Don't you think there's some value if they're tailored towards your particular curriculum, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, for sure. And, perhaps, the other thing I've thought about is, something more fundamentals. I think I dove in and built this computer, but haven't gone through a lot of the fundamentals of electrical engineering. I think people might be interested in that.
Is it possible that you're falling into a little bit of that trap where you're like, well, if you want to understand this, then you really got to lay down these fundamentals. And the very value of the things that you do or what gets you excited is when it's creating something actionable, as opposed to the usual format of some university professor saying, well, before we can ever get our hands on a computer, you're clearly going to need to understand how binary works very thoroughly and understand abstract circuit diagrams very thoroughly and how NAND gates can be used to build anything. And but before you know it, you've spent an entire semester not actually touching anything. right?
Yeah, no, if you're using resistors and capacitors together, we got to do some differential
Yeah, no,
equations here.
exactly, right? Is it unfair to claim that you're slipping into that a little bit?
I think it is unfair because I think there's different ways to do the fundamentals. I don't think you have to build it from the ground up. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought too much about it, but I don't think I would approach it as like, okay, we're going to learn about Ohm's law and then go through that. And then, okay, we're going to learn about Kirchhoff's laws. And I don't know that I would approach it that way. I'd probably approach it a different way with projects and use the projects to uncover some of these fundamental things, but then give it projects that would demonstrate some of the fundamentals in ways that are insightful and things like that.
It seems to me, Grant, like you're jumping to a quick conclusion.
I suppose that is a little bit true. I'm being a little bit of a devil's advocate here, but it is a real force, I think, right? That once you know something, when you map onto someone else's mind what they need to understand before they can do what you can do, it's strangely difficult to resist the urge to go from bottom up. I feel this personally. Maybe I'm just projecting onto others. Iter, I'm sure you would handle it well. You would do this project driven, probably a little bit more build from the sky down rather than vice versa. I mean, after all, and I'm going to try to mention this at least 5 times throughout the podcast, you are the Bob Ross of computer engineering. So I have full faith in the execution of that. But it's a real temptation, don't you think, when you sit down to structure an explanation?
Oh, for sure. And I think the strongest antidote to that is this thing that you and I share, which is that immediate reaction. Oh, you're not going to do it this way.
Yeah.
So the fact that you immediately jump to like, oh, but you might be tempted to do this is exactly my fear, which I think is the thing that protects me from actually doing it that way.
So I just put out that video, or the first one on neural nets, right? And there was one very well written comment to the effect of, man, if you really wanted to do this right, you'd probably want to lay down a few of the foundations for like how linear regression works, or like what data sets are linearly separable, and like why you need nonlinearities and basically the theory that kind of goes up to this in some way. And no one statement in it was wrong. And it was obviously well informed, and it was informed by however this person had first been exposed to machine learning. But the fun part is to be like, what is a neural net? Like, what is this thing actually doing? And the sooner you can get into that without getting into the nitty gritty of like why a nonlinearity is required to separate certain data sets or whatever you might be thinking about, the sooner you get there, the better, because the net itself can motivate that underlying lesson later on, presumably.
Totally feel you on the force existing. Definitely exists. Just dive in. It'll be way more interesting. And then you can fill in holes as they come up if someone's asking a specific question or something.
It's kind of hypocritical for me to say, because I'm pretty sure a lot of the things that I have put out in the world in like a pedagogical sense are a little bit more of the like bottom up and don't really care about an end problem being solved. And that reflects my personality. I think this will tie to whether you're viewing the domain as a utilitarian, pragmatic tool for the world versus a piece of art that you just get to intellectually bathe in. Honestly, a lot of my relationship with math is the latter. There's a lot of things where I don't really know how it's used, to be honest, but boy, is this interesting.
So let me ask you this then. I don't know, I mean, I have this whole 40 video series that God help you if you get through the whole thing in one sitting, but it's a lot of stuff there. But the way it starts is almost bottom up. So I'm starting to think like, maybe I did this thing that I shouldn't do, but I feel like it is different in some ways. I have a video on what is a semiconductor, and literally starting with the atoms and the interaction of how electrons flow through, boron doped or phosphorus doped silicon and the boundary between them and depletion zones and all that stuff. I get into all that and then build from that to, okay, how does a transistor work when you sandwich these together in a particular way? And then from transistor, you can build logic gates. And then from logic gates, you can build adders and you can build counters and all these things. So in some sense, did I do that? Is it bottom up?
Well, okay, so I'll be perfectly honest. It is not the case that I have seen all videos, and you know this, but
yeah.
So when I watched the semiconductor video, I did like it a lot as an explanation in isolation. And I'm not sure if this was the order in which it was intended to be viewed or anything of that sort. I would say the function of it at that point, from where I was as a viewer, was not yet motivated. And I was willing to give you enough. It's like I have a certain amount of cash in my hand, and I'm willing to give you a little bit of cash every time that there's something unmotivated, because I can reap that reward later on once we see how it's used. So for that, it's like, okay, semiconductors, I guess they do this thing. I guess this is what doping is. Here's a bit of cash in my hand. If you run me broke, that will be a problem. But it might be the case that there existed an alternate order here where first, it's extremely clear in my mind. And again, maybe you did this and I just like was going about things in the wrong order, but like why we want a transistor, why this is a bit of behavior that is going to be useful. And then you say, okay, like, does there exist a piece of the physical universe that can behave this way that we want? That, you know, you have the current coming in like this and it influences the other two entry points like this. And is that implementable with chemistry, right? If that was the burning question in my mind, and again, maybe it was, and I just watched these things out of order, I would claim that might be a slight improvement on an otherwise gold level series.
Yeah. I mean, and the other interesting thing is, as I'm thinking this through, it's like you don't necessarily have to watch them in a particular order. I mean, there obviously is some order.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could watch the adder video first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that one's motivated very clearly by like how do computers or any sort of circuit add numbers?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of assumes you understand binary. I think there's maybe some support in there for people who are a little rusty, but it roughly assumes that you know that. And then walks you through using logic gates. And I think logic gates are simple enough that you can sort of understand, you know, what an AND gate or an OR gate does without too much build up to it. So you could start there. And then that sort of motivates, well, like, how do these logic gates work? And then you could go sort of down the stack, as it were, towards semiconductors and transistors. Or you could say, like, okay, this is cool. You can add numbers. Now go up the stack and get to sequential logic and computers.
Stenhaug, what's your take? Top of the stack down, bottom of the stack up. Is a middle ground necessary? Is one of them clearly optimal?
So what I'm trying to figure out is, you seem to be saying, Grant, I don't know if you actually believe this, but that teaching in a top-down manner is always more desirable to bottom up. And then you're admitting that, but sometimes you've fallen into this bottom up trap.
I think I cannot make a statement about my opinion on that matter because it's so removed of context. You give me a given piece of context and I'll give you a firm opinion on if top down is unabashedly the better way to go.
I think you need to know where you're going.
Yeah.
So what does that mean in each case?
So top down, the idea is that you know where you're going because you're starting with something familiar.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting with a computer. And then we're just going to peel that apart and go down and down and down and in layers of abstraction. Bottom up, you're starting with something that's like fairly abstract, which is like you're starting with some chemistry and semiconductors and transistors. And that, to Grant's point, like, okay, maybe you could give the benefit of the doubt for a little while till you see where it's going. Or you could say, we're going to explain how computers work, and maybe even give a map and say, like, okay, we're going to explain how computers work, and we're going to start with semiconductors. We're going to go to transistors. Transistors make up logic gates. Logic gates can be used for combinational logic that can be used to add numbers and do other logic operations.
It's funny how even right now, as you're phrasing it, the order that you put it was bottom up, like transistors up, right?
But you knew where I was going. You know that I'm eventually going to get to computer.
I guess. Well, I feel like that's kind of a cop-out in a type of top-down. Having the top exist in someone's mind and then working from the bottom towards that top, right? That feels like it's not necessarily the intent when someone describes top-down pedagogy.
I think the point I'm trying to make is that having a map of where you're going is helpful. And, you know, yeah, I guess I was describing that map from the bottom up, but I was doing it in like 5 sentences.
I have cash aplenty to give you those 5 sentences.
All about the cash.
Right. So give me those 5 sentences, and then that buys me a little bit of credit to then start at the bottom and go up, or the top and down, you know, whichever actually makes sense.
The only thing I wanted to point out in the ordering of those sentences was just that is the natural way to have even phrased it. Is an interesting thing. That's not to say that that's how you would have been putting it together, but our minds are just so wired to construct it like that. And it's like trying to build a pyramid from the top stone down. It physically doesn't resonate.
So I want to separate bottom up from, I guess, 2 things that I think it gets conflated with sometimes. Bottom up does not necessarily, in my mind, have to be the historical way in which something was discovered. So it doesn't have to be the exact process that someone figured out how to construct a computer or figured out how to prove the Pythagorean theorem.
Oh, yeah.
Or whatever. And nor does it have to be the way, and I think we fall into this temptation sometimes, which is to repeat our own learning experience. So to make them follow this path that we followed. It doesn't have to be either of those things. We can smooth the path for the learner in a way that pedagogically makes sense and is not either of those probably convoluted paths. And I think that's maybe obvious when you say it, but I'm not sure it isn't if you don't think about it.
There's a word for this, or rather, this is not yet a word for that phenomenon, but I would like it to become one. I think the credit for this goes to Michael Nielsen, who he's like written a bunch of different things on a bunch of different topics, but he calls it discovery fiction, where you paint an imagined path for how you would discover this thing. It's not the path of history, because that's usually more meandering than it needs to be. It's probably not your own path, because maybe that's more meandering than it needs to be. But the type of article this is going to be a fictional imagined discovery of the thing. And the context in which it came up, he wrote this really good article on how Bitcoin works. And he has this imagined, like, if you were creating your own type of currency, like, what would it be? And what's funny is, like, I was shown this while I was working on the video that I made about Bitcoin and had written the thing and was in the midst of animating it. A friend of mine was like, hey, have you seen this, like, really good article? And I was by this guy, and I'm like, oh, interesting. It's a very similar approach, or at least at the outset of imagine you're discovering your own, and then what steps would you take? And it's not a terribly original approach to take necessarily, but I think just it having a word out there as a genre, discovery fiction, would make for better expository papers out there. Just that is one of the cards that you might be drawing as the choice for how to go about this thing. And it's exactly what you're pointing out here. It does not have to reflect history. It does not have to reflect your own experience. But the intent, I mean, what's carried in the word discovery of that really is kind of a...
So is discovery fiction the same as bottom up?
I think they're orthogonal, if not like kind of in the opposite direction, because if you are discovering something, right? Like in this Bitcoin example, it's, well, it depends on how you want to go about it. But let's say you start with keeping track of money on a ledger and then slowly removing trust from that. All of that is very top down, because at each given point, you have like the high level thing. Oh, we're like keeping track of US dollars just on a communal ledger. Okay. And then later on, it's like, oh, well, you never really settle up at the end, and all of your exchanges exist purely in the ledger, as if it was like a Venmo or a Square Cash that you can't actually cash out from. Like, you can still use it as a medium of exchange. Like, okay. And I would describe that as top down, where you are slowly peeling back closer and closer to the nitty gritty implementation details, where at each step, it kind of feels reasonable, but by the time you get to the end and you're removing bits of trust like centralization, suddenly you're in deeply technical territory of, oh boy, like, how do you get a bunch of parties to agree on what the status of a certain document should be if there's no central authority that they trust? And the technical, interesting, challenging things always tend to come at the end when you go about it that way, rather than starting off with like, this is what a proof of work scheme is, and let me teach you about a cryptographic hash function.
So then let me ask you this. How would you go about explaining how the internet works?
All right. So that's a heavy question.
Dropping bombshells, Eater. Just dropping absolute bombshells.
Well, okay. So that's a really good question, because part of the challenge in me trying to think here is I don't have a rock solid sense for how the internet works. I have a loose conception of the main 7 layers of abstraction for what your various protocols are.
Sounds like a Ben and Blue video comment. I can just see it. I can see the animations and the pie figures now.
Yeah, that would be fun. Create a video on how the internet works.
Can we pause? Because we're going to lose a thread that I want to just clear up before we dive into this one.
Yeah, save me from this, actually. Not just a pause. Totally.
No. I don't want to save you. We're going to come right back to it, so you can let your mind, you can get some cortisol pumping into your veins for when we come back to directly you on this. When you say discovery fiction, is that a good or a bad thing? Are you describing the mistake made where we try to reproduce meandering paths that are not efficient to learn from? Or it's a good thing when we're creating fake paths that are effective for learners to travel?
No, it's a great thing. I think it is the thing to strive for.
Okay.
That is my belief. Hardcore.
That's it's a fictional sense of discovery, but it's not how it actually happens, so it's a good thing. Discovery nonfiction is the act of trying to recreate something that's too meandering for it to make sense to a learner.
Yes.
Discovery nonfiction about the internet begins with DARPANET. Discovery fiction about the internet is like, paint the landscape where the internet doesn't exist, but computers do. And like, you live in California and your friend lives in Oregon and another friend lives in Washington. And you have a couple like other people who are in California with you, and slowly building up from there, the means by which you're communicating with each other. If you have like a new person working with you pop up in Texas, how it's going to be seamless for them to become part of the network, minimizing the need to register or anything like that. Like, that is not how the internet came about, but I think that would be how the discovery fiction might begin. As a rough draft, might need more editing.
Probability we can get this as a Ben and Blue video. Come on.
Ben and Blue video. See, is that a thing? I don't...
That's not a thing. also, just FYI, I have a 13-part video series on how the internet works. So
wait, you do either?
I do, yeah.
Oh, Ben and Blue doesn't need to cover that with a new form of media that we create together.
No. So this is why I asked the question, because and this is great that neither of you have apparently watched them or even knew they existed, because
oh boy,
now I can get
guilty.
No, this is perfect.
Dude, that's on
thank
us.
you. Thank you for not watching them, because now we can have this conversation, which is I'm actually very interested in how you would go about explaining how the internet works in terms of discovery fiction or top up or bottom down or what that even means. Because I obviously have an opinion because I made a series of videos on this and I took a particular path.
That sounds fascinating. We watch those videos sometimes, Grant, and then we just absolutely berate Eater with comments.
I cannot be a very good conversationalist for you right now. Before I go about structuring anything, I feel like I want to have a really clear grasp of it in my own mind. And frankly, that's not the case for the internet and my relationship with how the internet works. So,
but where would you start? Being someone who doesn't have a firm grasp about the internet and how it works, and what is the foothold that you think would be most helpful?
As an explainer or as a student? Where do I start my research, or where do I start the opening paragraph?
I don't know. I don't know what I'm asking.
Because it's going to have to be as a student right now.
Well, I mean, you kind of started, right? You said, we're not going to start with DARPANET and go through the whole history of the whole thing. But imagine a world where, computers exist and networks don't. Is that where you'd start?
That's my instinct right now.
Okay.
I'm not saying that that's the final draft. That is where I would start. Maybe the thing I would first want to really settle in is the importance of protocol. And I would try to motivate in a way that just doesn't come about as much in daily life. What we mean when we refer to protocols, and kind of why it's important to have standardization for what this interface is, but without standardization for exactly what's happening either on top of or below it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the target point is. What does video want? Is the target point IP? What that is, and why that is something that you might have invented for yourself?
Seems like part of it, maybe IP and some of the things about how it works.
Can I give a controversial take?
Yeah,
go for it.
I don't know how the internet works. I don't barely know it exists, and I don't care.
I don't know how controversial that is.
Maybe for this audience and this group, it's controversial.
Do you care that it works? Do you care that it's not going to turn off tomorrow?
I like using the internet, for sure.
All right. What things do you care about for how they work?
I guess maybe if I had to put on a continuum of interested in how things work, I'd go Eater, Grant, me. I am pretty happy to just use stuff and know how to press the buttons on the microwave, and really
wait. So is what you were graphing there which of us is most interested in how the internet works, or the entities that you are most interested in figuring out how they work? Because I think it works pretty well.
Wait. I'm most interested in how Eater works, and then
you're most interested in how Eater as a mind works.
Oh, more so than learning about yourself.
You prioritize knowing thyself.
Who cares about knowing thyself? That's a great bit. No, I was graphing the degree to which it seems Eater strikes me as a guy that just, if he sees something working, he just wants to get in there and unscrew some screws and rip apart some pieces and look at whatever the heck's inside there. Grant, you seem like you could maybe be lured away by that with a frisbee or a game of chess or something. And I'll just use the thing.
That seems like a perfectly fair assessment. I can be lured away from the details of the internet with the frisbee.
So you are actually bringing up a point, which is maybe where you start from, is motivating you that it is interesting.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So maybe we need the highly produced Discovery Channel special on how the internet works to make you excited about it.
I don't know.
I'm being somewhat facetious there.
Those kind of things, right? Discovery Channel, it always is painted under this excuse of this will raise the curiosity in people's minds. And I just don't think it does. I don't think people come out wanting to dig in deeper. If anything, it gives this false sense of that's a thing I once learned about. Checked. Got it. On to the next thing, right?
Right.
I know you were saying it facetiously, but I'm going to hop on that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying how I actually believe that.
I'm side-skirting your central question of how I would explain how the internet works. I recognize fully that I'm kind of stalling on that, because the honest answer is it's unclear exactly. This is what's so hard, right? Discovery fiction's not easy.
Well, would you reframe the question?
Well, no, honestly, if right now you're hey, Grant, for weird reasons, the next videos you put on your channel absolutely have to be a series on how the internet works. What I would do is just go research a bunch until I felt like I had a broad enough grasp for the way that each component sort of played with each other. And then I'd go for a long walk and introspect about which parts seem to matter and what possible paths of discovery to that endpoint would be. But I just feel shooting in the dark. discovering discovery fiction it's very hard.
Yeah. And so I guess it sounds like, yeah, you'd be kind of open to all sorts of different approaches until you.
How'd you do it? Maybe I shouldn't ask and just watch the things, but like, give me a little feelings on your philosophy for what constituted the structure of those 11 videos.
Well, I guess since I'm not going to get anything out of you.
Yeah.
Punt on that.
This is just going to be like more minutes of stalling.
Yeah. So the way that I approached it was bottom up. I started with kind of the question of how would you send information over a wire? You have a piece of wire between two computers.
Mm-hmm.
How do you send information? You can kind of set different signals on that wire, whether it's 5 volts or 0 volts, like those are 0 and 1. You can maybe encode other symbols, but let's say 2 symbols. And so then you have this string of binary digits. And then, how do you group those binary digits into bytes? And then how do you group those bytes into things? And then kind of building up, how do you connect multiple computers together and get data to the correct destination? And yeah, just sort of that bottoms up approach, and then sort of building layer on top of layer on top of layer with sort of a question framing each why. If you have a string of ones and zeros going across a wire, how do you know where the bytes are? If you're trying to send bytes, you could pick any group of 8 digits. How do you know which groups of 8 digits make bytes? And that motivates this question that results in framing, and this idea of framing that was sort of, so it is sort of this fictional discovery, which is sort of like, well, how would you do this? And it's like, well, framing is the solution that does that. And then how do you get a packet of data then to another computer? It's like, well, you need addressing. And so you have a header that has an address in it. And then, how do you know what protocol that is? It's like, okay, well, there's a field in the header that tells you that, things like that. And then sequence numbers. And so it's a very bottoms up approach.
It's funny. I think the reasons that can work will be, one, the name of the series is this thing that people except for Stan Haug care about, that, oh, here's this thing that I use every day, and maybe it'll be fun to look under the hood. And at every given point, we know what the top of the pyramid is from the get-go. So we can always at least reference and get a sense for is that the direction that we're moving? And then the second way that can succeed is when each little subproblem is kind of interesting and thought-provoking in and of itself, right? How do you get this packet to go to the right destination when all you can do is send it off to the next router? Those two factors together, the intrinsic interestingness of the puzzle and the top of the pyramid being there within view, will make it go. And obviously, I haven't seen the series. I'm sure that it was done beautifully, but I might just put out the claim that there exists I'll just say compelling in a different way possibility. Rather than thinking about a particular packet of information yet, I'm trying to load Facebook, or I'm trying to load a particular page or a thing that is of interest. And that's the thing that we're breaking down. It's like, okay, what does it mean when you log into Facebook and this bunch of faces of your friends pop up on there? Obviously, it's a very complicated thing. So the right path is to prune through which parts matter, which parts don't. And maybe, you isolate down just to, where did this information come from? Who's storing this? And how did my computer know to talk to Facebook's computers? And how did they know to talk to mine? What's going on there? Is there a little spot in my computer that's this is the address of Facebook? So maybe if I was doing this, it would start at DNS, right? And associating things like URLs with addresses, and how the address lets the information not thought of in packets and bytes, but just thought of as that Facebook page that I wanted to view, get from the right computer to the right computer and going down.
All of a sudden, you have a pretty strong understanding of how internet works.
Yeah, Grant, you're absolutely sandbagging us.
I think one of the more popular textbooks does take a top-down approach, and that always sort of irked me because it didn't seem right to me, or it didn't sort of fit with the way my brain thinks about it. But obviously, people wrote textbooks about it, people teach it.
That's kind of what I'm saying. I think the way that we think about things when we understand them is bottom up. And my claim is that to achieve that understanding, often, and again, I can't make a hard statement like this in generality because specifics are what matters, but I'll use the internet as an example. Going from the top down, I think, is the way to achieve that understanding. But then once you sit back and you are at a Ben Eater level of understanding, you're like, what's going on here? You're thinking in terms of the bits that make the bytes, that make the packets, that make the message, that have an address at the header, and there's headers and headers and headers and things like that. And all of these layers. The pyramid metaphor is what I'm using just because it feels so visceral, where when you know what a pyramid is, it's just hard to imagine building it anything other than bottom up. That's kind of the point, I guess, is that you would understand it bottom up.
So what you're saying is, yeah, I guess I would. I do. And that's how I think about it. And that's, I suppose, why I explained it the way that I did, are you suggesting that there's maybe a more effective way to explain it, and that would be top down?
Having not watched the videos at all.
I mean, I keep couching this in language that's maybe a little bit more weaseling out of a hard opinion than I should. But yeah, I think there exists an explanation that would work better for some, an explanation that's compelling in a different way. I think there exists a series about the internet that is compelling in a very different way from the ways that yours was. And I'm sure there is a large portion of the population for whom yours was compelling. And it might even be the case that it is the most compelling possible series. And I'm just, by talking in the abstract and not sitting down and making the videos, just don't know what I'm talking about. But this is the trap that I think creators of explanations are always going to fall into, which is the way that you understand it and the way you introspect about it in your own mind is often distinct from the appropriate path to discovery.
Well, so then, yeah, this is interesting because there's another interesting distinction between I've made this series of videos on networking, and I've obviously made this series of videos on building the computer. I would consider myself, in terms of electrical engineering, an amateur in computer engineering. I'm an amateur. I've never done it professionally. It's a hobby. I spent 15 years as a network engineer. And so that is ostensibly a field that I know a ton about. Certainly far more complexity than what is in the videos. The videos are, I would consider, very basic relative to, a lot of the work that I was doing. But the networking videos are informed by 15 years of work in the field. The computer videos are, I'm an amateur.
You're spoiled by expertise?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think they're both pretty good. I mean, obviously, there's tons of ways that I look at them and imagine that they could be better, but I don't look at one as like, the network video is so much better because, or the computer thing is so much better because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know.
Well,
so I want to get away from intuition on this.
Go on.
I want to see the top-down video that Grant's made beautifully, and then I want to randomly assign both videos to folks on the internet, and I want to ask them over survey, I don't know how much they learned. Maybe we actually have a pre-post test. Maybe we ask them how motivated they are to learn more. Maybe we can watch how much extra Googling they do afterwards as a measure of engagement when how motivated they are as a result. I'm not sure I trust our intuition on which is better. And I think we have ways to gather evidence on this. I wish it was happening more in the world. Maybe I got to be the guy.
Wait, so once again, you've put out an idea that is both brilliant and totally unachievable because of the work that it might require. If it was like creating...
That's not unachievable.
I don't want to make a series about the internet. However...
Wait. Well, hey.
All right. What, Eater?
No, this is interesting because this comes back to the question that we started with, which is what's next for the Ben Eater channel? Maybe what's next is a top-down series on the internet.
Yeah. And then can we run an RCT and randomly assign them to different people and figure out a way to measure quality?
That would be kind of fun. What I was going to throw out there was if we narrow the scope to something a little bit smaller than like the internet, here's what would be really fun to me is to have a bake-off between my channel and Eater's, right? On a given day, it's like an anti-collaboration where on a given day we each publish a video about a given topic and we tell people the gig, right? We tell them that, okay, Eater and I have each made a video on the same topic, but we have very different approaches. We want you to watch this video and take this quiz afterwards. That would be hilarious to me, is doing a bake-off like that.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm with you, but I want it blind.
Okay, you're okay. I see what you're saying because
or I want both.
Our styles are pretty different. People are going to know this.
Yeah, but like if they are like respective members of your audiences, the bias is too extreme. If they're just random people that don't know Ben from Grant.
This can be a shameless opportunity for growth on both of our parts because we tell people this. We're like, you, beloved subscriber and audience member, I just want you to sit down and enjoy this, and there is no onus on you. However, if you know anybody who does not know about this channel and does not know about Eaters, please send them to like such and such URL that's going to randomly assign them a video by someone who presumably they never heard of before, right? And then, we got ourselves a new audience member.
Fascinating.
Plus some, real data and actual testing the efficacy of alternate philosophies on how to structure explanations of the internet or whatever it might be.
So there's an interesting question here in the name of isolating things is, if let's say Eater goes bottom up and Grant goes top down, and then one of you guys wins in your explanation of the internet, it might not be the top down or bottom up approach. It might just be that Eater understands the internet a lot better and therefore gives crisper explanations or something.
That does seem like the most likely outcome for this particular example. That's true, because difference of media would start to matter a lot. I take a lot of time on visuals because I think that instills understanding in a more effective way than alternates for what you can have on screen at the time. So it would have to be, if it was going to be a true bake-off, it would have to be a little bit more controlled than what would happen if we didn't put any extra rules.
So that's where me making a series of how the internet works top down to compare to my existing series on how the internet works from the bottom up would potentially be interesting. The problem is I already have a series on how the internet works, and I don't really feel like making another one.
Right. There's something more general here, which is that I just wish this happened for any content. I wish we were just actually comparing explanations of any math concept or anything we explain and seeing the most effective one. I think most people have the intuition that, oh, it's going to depend on the learner, which explanation they works best. And my intuition is just that there's going to be one that is pretty much overall best for almost everyone in the population.
I might line up with that. I'm definitely a believer in some explanations just being objectively better and it not being a matter of like, oh, well, I was a visual learner, but this person was an auditory learner and this person was an olfactory learner or whatever. It's like, no, just some things are just more intelligently structured.
There's a food analogy here, right? It's so you might be like, well, I like some types of pasta better than others. Like there are some types of pasta that just knock the socks off of other types of pasta.
Yeah, no, that's a good analogy.
I want to meet an olfactory learner. Yeah, I don't really buy the learning type thing.
So we probably can't expect a second series on the internet from you because you want to create things that have not been created.
I mean, given how little time I have.
Yeah, and also it's totally hypocritical of me in response to Stenhouse proposing that maybe I make a series on how the internet works with an alternate tag and be like, that's completely unreasonable. That's the most
You acted like I was suggesting we all get in a rocket and travel to Pluto tomorrow.
I don't know. You've caught me in a moment when I keep feeling like projects just keep exploding and the things that I intend to do are pushed back further and further because of constant scope creep on active things. Like neural nets, this was supposed to be one video at first, and then I was like, man, I really should separate the structure from the learning, so I'll make it 2 videos, and maybe I'll make them later, so I'll frame the titles as if it's going to be a series. And then I'm working on the one on learning. I'm like, well, this should really be broken up into gradient descent versus backpropagation. So it'll really be 3 videos, and I'll keep framing it as if it'll be a series because I'll probably want to do other things later on. Like before I know it, this thing that was supposed to be one video is channel's going to be about nothing other than neural nets if I don't stop something. So when you come at me proposing not just another video, but another series, you scratched a nerve.
Hey, that's my bad. We'll repair our relationship off podcast.
You're reminding me of that time I set out to make a video about how computers work.
Yeah, I was going to ask way early on, like, did you expect this to be a 4-year project?
No.
If you were to give the most honest estimate, like we go back in time, I step up, I'm like, hi, my name is Grant. And like, I'm curious to hear what you're doing. And you talk about these videos and I'm like, oh, how long do you think that'll take? What's your answer?
I mean, to be fair, I didn't really know. It originally started as a long weekend project. I had like 4 days or something where I didn't have anything else planned. And I was like, I think I can build an 8-bit computer on breadboards from scratch. And it'd be really cool to have a series of videos that explains how it works. And so I sat down and did that. And I actually had a camera pointed at my desk the whole time I did it and was recording the whole time. I wasn't narrating anything. I was just building it. And I figured I'd structure and kind of weave all the footage together later into a couple of videos about how it went and how it works. And I was actually successful. In about 4 days, I had the whole thing put together and mostly working. And then, a little bit of cleanup in some free time afterwards and had the thing work. It was, a functioning computer. I never did anything with the footage.
Is that true even to today, that footage has gone unused?
I don't even know where it is now, sadly.
Oh, damn. I was going to ask. So, how like I like to have just random ambient things happening in the video versions of the podcast where it's silly to have like video versions of a podcast, but it's like, hey, we're on YouTube. So maybe that's how some people find it. Like that would have been the perfect thing to have as just the ambient background to this audio.
Yes.
The very small percentage of people who, for some reason, listen to podcasts by watching a YouTube video would get to this point and it'd be like, oh, and they would see how it all came together.
Yes. Yeah. Don't hold your hopes. Yeah. So, and then I ended up actually putting together a slide deck explaining the process. And so that was actually kind of where I framed the whole thing, because I think I I gave a talk or something on it, or I was planning to give a talk about how computer worked and to a group of people. And I had computers, going to show them, we were going to program it together. And then I was going to kind of give a little talk about how it all worked, kind of roughly going through the same process that the videos do now, but in just like an hour presentation form. And so I did that. And so those slides actually kind of started out the outline for the videos that I eventually made. I just kind of assumed that, that hour presentation could turn into an hour video, and that would be that.
Stands to reason. It's like 4 days to make it, 1 hour to present on it. How long can it take to just upload that to YouTube?
Yeah, so that was sort of my original expectation. And yeah, I figured out it would probably be a little longer because I'm going to want to, give a little bit more background, a little more detail, and explain things, and give a little bit more background on how a transistor works or that sort of thing. But yeah, I didn't expect 40 videos or 42 video, whatever it is up to these days, and however many years it's been.
It's such a hard balance because like the thing about putting out a video, especially if you feel any kind of pride in what you do, is you have the sense that this is going to exist forever. So every time a little thought enters your mind of, oh, well, should I like expand on this, or should we go into more detail here? Or should you like take the time to get this particular thing doing what you want? The answer almost always comes out in the calculus just as yes, because you integrate over the lifetime existence of it and like the people potentially being exposed to it. You're like, well, the number of hours it requires me versus the number of learning hours saved for someone else. It always balances out where you want to do the extra thing.
Yep.
Maybe it's a bad thing. Maybe it's a good thing. I don't know. But it is a phenomenon of creating videos that you intend to be used as a source of clarity rather than a source of like entertainment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Even that, like there's still so many things that I don't spend that extra time on because at the end of the day, like I do want to get videos made.
Yeah, otherwise it's Zeno's video, right? And just like it takes 4 years to do this the one. So it does have to end somewhere.
Yeah, so I think I'm unhappy with every video I've uploaded for some reason or another. But
yeah, welcome to the club.
If I weren't, like they just never happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we veered away kind of far from the what's happening next on Ben Eater. I feel like we've gotten a couple answers for what's probably not happening, but what Stenhaug would like to happen.
Wait, what's that? The real life Ben Eater bootcamp?
Yeah, doing the random controlled trial of 2 alternate series on how the internet works. That's the kind of thing that would be interesting just as a thing to exist. You would hear about this being done, like, oh, did you hear about that guy who made not 1, but 2 different series on how the internet worked and actually tried to do experiments to figure out which was more effective? People are like, oh, what an interesting thing to have done. But like, they don't participate in the experiment themselves or anything. It's more the headliner is the content in that case for a lot of people.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like it's worth it.
Exactly.
Hey, time will tell. There's no doubt about that.
So to answer your question, I have no idea what I'm doing next.
Don't we all? You have a lot of very different interests, and in a lot of ways, Eater, you're kind of the most interesting man in the world. I constantly get these things out of left field that I just didn't know about you before. And in that way, if what your channel is took a hard turn in something that was not necessarily computer engineering oriented, that would be interesting. And I almost think like in character for you.
That is not how you win YouTube.
Yeah, but like, who cares? Like, screw the algorithm.
No, I know.
But also you don't really know. It could be the case. Like if you have some kind of series that's actually dedicated to kind of motivating students, like C students who feel a lack of confidence because of what the system is telling them, but shouldn't because there are lots of other things that should be measured that schools don't. Or the fact that if you are a C student and you come out confident, you have something that no straight A student ever will, which is a sense that despite an external force telling you that you are bad at something, knowing in your heart of hearts that either that thing doesn't matter or you're actually good at it, there is no straight A student who comes out with that level of resilience. And if there's something that you create, I don't know if it's like a series of video essays. I don't even know. It could literally be a vlog. I'm just really throwing out the alternate directions that Ben Eater, the channel, could take. You laid out this as a goal, as something that you care about, is reaching people who were like you. That would be interesting to see, is that being the central goal and really diving deep into that and really speaking as if you are there with one of these students standing right in front of you. That would be very different. That would be in some sense not winning the YouTube game, but maybe in a perverse way it would, because there definitely exists a universe in which the things that you choose to talk about when you really picture yourself with that C student 8th grader sitting in front of you appeals to a lot of people that aren't your usual audience and like ends up growing the channel in a way that it wouldn't have before.
Yeah, this is really interesting because I haven't thought about this particular tact, right? Which is I've always sort of approached it from, okay, I had this experience and this is sort of my life and my background. And that is the thing that motivates me to want to teach things in the way that I wish I had been taught, which is different than speaking to people who are in the situation that I was in. It's like a different direction, a different tact on that.
Let me close things off, I guess, with this. My challenge to you, maybe you won't follow through with it. Maybe you shouldn't follow through with it. The title of a video, some future video on your channel, is Dear C Student. That is the title. Make that video. Fill in the details.
Let's go.
Fascinating. I mean, I could just sit there and tell my story. That sounds.
That could be it. If that's how you want to fill in the prompt, but it's not the only way.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like there's so many like sort of, I don't know, motivational speakers or whatever.
Well, so maybe that's the thing. You write down like the first 10 things that a typical motivational speaker would say, and you cross them off immediately. It's like, this is not going to be productive. Or you call them out and call out like why certain things that people say in an attempt to console someone about not doing great in school like don't really matter or are counterproductive or are framed in such a way as if school is the thing that matters when the whole point is that I'm not speaking from a knowledgeable standpoint because I've never been like a school counselor talking to someone who is stressed out about their grades and what it means for their future. But I'm pretty confident that a lot of the framing of those conversations is around the fact that school actually does matter or that these grades actually do mean something. And maybe the most comforting thing is to zoom out and like look at things from a completely different frame. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting. What you're getting at is kind of a different domain of learning, right? I think a lot of the videos that you and I have made, if you sort of look at Bloom's taxonomy, and you get a little bit technical here, there's like these different domains of learning. And so what I think we've traditionally focused on is the cognitive domain. So like learning concepts. And there are two other domains in that taxonomy. There's the affective domain and the psychomotor domain. And the psychomotor domain is kind of hand-eye coordination skill, like learning to ride a bicycle or learning to cook or something like that, perhaps falls in there. The affective domain is like learning new attitudes, changing your belief structure. And that's almost kind of what you're talking about.
I think you're in an unusually unique position to directly address that domain, given your background and given your current level of confidence.
Yeah, I don't know about any of that. I think I'm motivated to do it.
Yeah. All right. That's the challenge. That is the challenge. You have the video title. You fill it in with whatever audio, visual, writing you seem fits best.
Yeah, I think it might take more than one video.
4 years later, right?
No.
Let's see where it goes.
No, I mean, that's the point I was trying to make by saying like, this is actually a different domain of learning. And like, these are different concepts to learn. It's like, yeah, teaching a value like that is like, can you teach somebody data science in a single video? Like, of course not. Can you teach someone this sort of, for lack of a better word, growth mindset in a single video? Like, of course not.
I will say, if you are like worried about the winning the YouTube game, second channel. I like that almost seems like a joke because like you are stretched enough for time for doing anything on your main channel as it is. But it would almost be poetic if there was a channel that existed and only ever had like 5 videos on it. And it was meant just for that.
I think it's pretty obvious I'm not interested in winning the YouTube game.
Yeah, okay.
I'd be doing a lot of things very differently.
Hey, this is Grant here to close things off for you. So what better way to close off a podcast about education than to give you a little bit of homework? Now, obviously, this is purely optional, but the other day when we were talking about possible good podcast topics, one that Eder brought up was really digging into what the purpose of education is, or what our views on the purpose of education is. And Stenhaug brought up this really good paper, kind of a classic, addressing that question. It's by David Labaree. I'm almost certainly mispronouncing that name, but Labaree. It's called Public Goods, Private Goods, The American Struggle Over Educational Goals. I'll leave a link in the description. You don't have to read the whole thing, obviously, but I do think if you maybe just read the abstract or the first page, it'll help kind of whet your appetite because next recording, we're basically going to discuss this thing. I certainly have views on the paper. I'm pretty sure Eder has some pretty strong views on the paper as well, and Stenhaug's the one to bring it up. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I hope you enjoy it too, and I'll see you guys next video. Or not video, sorry. Force of habit. See you next podcast.